Hume's view, there are four circumstances that together jointly cause much avoidable natural evil. And it's important that there's avoidable natural evil, if indeed there is, for two reasons. One is that if there's avoidable natural evil, then the universe is not so well ordered, and so one of the premises of the design argument is false, and so the design argument is unsound. So together, if there's avoidable natural evil, there's a sound argument that the design argument is unsound. And so that removes a reason to believe that God exists, or that a good God exists anyway. That the God, according to the traditional conception of God, exists. Secondly, if God exists, then there's no avoidable natural evil. That's pretty plausible, as we saw previously, and that means that if there is avoidable natural evil, then in fact God does not exist. So really, if there's avoidable natural evil, then that would both undermine an argument in favor of God's existence and give us an argument, or help to give us an argument against God's existence if we want such an argument. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but that's what the effect of this premise is. So it's really important whether or not there's avoidable natural evil. And so Hume is going to argue for these four circumstances, that much natural evil is caused by the cooperation of these four circumstances, and that means that the universe would be improved by eliminating at least one of these four. And that means that some natural evil is avoidable. So what are these four circumstances? Well, the first circumstance that introduces evil, says Hume, is the device or arrangement of the animal creation by which pains as well as pleasures are employed to rouse creatures to action and make them alert in the great work of self-preservation. So by definition, or by its very nature, rather, pain is entirely unpleasant, but it's not all bad. It's a very important damage signal. It tells us that something in our bodies has been damaged, and it's really important. People born without the ability to feel pain tend to die early, and the reason, well, there are two-part reasons to this. One is that they don't notice injuries, and then the second is that they don't, even if they do notice injury, they don't respond as intensely, and so these injuries aren't corrected, and that causes all sorts of complications, which often leads to early death. So pain is a very important tool for us. It lets us know that there is damage, and it motivates us to do something about the damage. So it's really important in our way we actually function. However, is it necessary? Well, is it avoidable? I mean, if we just got rid of it, then things would be worse. But Hume suggests that we could have an alternative psychological structure. A bigger change would make us better off. So in particular, he imagines we're always in some sort of pleasant state of mind, but when there's a need or damage, then that pleasure decreases, and we want to have as much pleasure as possible, or we want to increase pleasure in that situation just as much as we actually want to avoid pain. So when the pleasure goes down because there's been damage or need, we're just as motivated to do something about that. We would be just as motivated to do something about that damage as we actually are by the pain. So it says, actually we're motivated by pain, we're informed and motivated by pain, but we could have been informed and motivated by a decrease in pleasure instead, and that would be just as effective if we cared about that decrease in pleasure just as much. And so pain's role as a damage signal and sort of motivational tool seems avoidable. We actually, if we just got rid of it, we'd be worse off, but there are alternatives that would work better, or where we would be better off than if we suffered pain. But Hume says, look, it's actually not the capacity for pain by itself that's the problem. It's the fact that we have the capacity for pain and the world is governed by general laws. So why is that, and what does that mean anyway? So Hume thinks that the universe is regular. Here are some examples. The sun rises every day. Buildings don't move around. This isn't something Hume would have said, but because cars weren't around when Hume was living, but cars accelerate when you step on the gas, and people need to eat almost every day. So those are just some regularities, ways that the universe behaves in the same way. Different parts at different times behave in the same way. And these regularities are good. Why? They help us predict the future. The universe is not completely chaotic, and that's how we know what's going to happen next. We say, well, in general, things happen this way, this way, this way, so in this situation we can say a certain outcome is highly likely or fairly likely or quite unlikely because we know it's like these other situations, and all those situations behave in the same way. It's that different situations behave in the same way. That's the regularity of the universe. And that helps us to predict what's going to happen. And of course, it's extremely important to be able to predict what's going to happen, what will be the effects of our actions. But is absolute regularity necessary for our ability to predict the future and more generally for things to be good? Hume doesn't think so. You can imagine that the deity, or this God, could interfere in little ways when necessary to help. And the universe is already uncertain, and maybe the deity intervenes in small ways, in ways that we don't notice. So the deity could interfere to make things work out better, violate the regularities, without undermining our ability to make reasonable predictions. And then we would still be able to make all the predictions we need to, but the deity's violations of the regularities that we don't notice would make us better off. And so it doesn't seem like we need absolute regularity. We can avoid the problems, where we suffer pain. The deity can cause, sort of make pain avoid the painful situations without us, and yet leave us able to predict the future. So, but actually, it's not just the fact that the universe is regular and pain is a damage signal and motivator. There's another factor, which is that contributes to the suffering, and that's the fact of the great frugality, says Hume, with which all powers and faculties are distributed to every particular being, so to each one of us. What does he mean by that? So, we animals like us and other animals, have limited powers. Right? We're not able to do everything we want. We're vulnerable in various ways, and so on. And the way Hume puts this is he says that nature endows beings only with what they absolutely need to survive and nothing more, as if doling out a limited resource. So we have what we need to survive, but we don't have what would necessarily make it easy to survive, right? So we're able, for example, to go and collect food, but it takes a lot of work to do that. And so the sort of amount of work that we need to do relative to the is very high relative to the what we get out of it. Maybe it would be nicer if it was easier for us to grow food, if we could grow food more quickly, for example. If we were stronger and faster at moving around, then we could get our crops planted more quickly, just as an example. So, and all animals are like that, right? So a cheetah has to run super fast to catch its prey, and giraffes, many animals have to spend all of their time eating in order to survive. And if they don't eat, it's very easy for them to not eat enough, to be in a situation where they don't eat enough and then die, and so on. So many animals are right on the edge of survival. And so what Hume restates this by saying, nature seems to have calculated exactly what her creatures need, and, like a stern employer, has granted them little more than the powers or endowments that are strictly sufficient to meet those needs. That, by the way, is what you would expect if evolution is true. And that's the way it seems to be. So you might wonder, well, why wouldn't an indulgent parent have been kinder to us? Wouldn't an indulgent parent have given us a better stock of powers so that we're more able to guard against accidents? We're not as easily damaged. When we are damaged, it's easier for us to recover, and it's easier for us to get what we need for our happiness and welfare. Why wouldn't nature make us basically stronger? And Hume says, look, in particular, for humans, there's one change would make a big difference if we had a greater propensity to work. Right? Hume thinks that a lot of what makes our situation challenging is that we don't like working, and we find it tiresome and tedious a lot of the time, and so it's difficult for us to get ourselves to do it. We don't do as much as would be beneficial, and it's not as pleasant as it would be if we were more inclined to work. So Hume says, look, change one thing, give us a greater desire to do, things that will benefit us in the long term, and we would be much better off. Right? That would be just one change, by which we would then be able to, there are all these regularities that result in lots of pain for us. We bump into things, we don't have enough food, we don't have enough water when we get sick, and so on. Hume says if we were more inclined to work, then you could leave all those regularities in place. We'd be able to take all sorts of, but we get much more done, and we would therefore prevent all the situations that bring about pain. Well, except that actually there's a fourth factor. It's not just those three factors. What Hume says, the fourth factor leading to the misery and misfortune of the universe is the inaccurate workmanship of all the workings and principles of the great machine of nature. So what is Hume talking about? Well, we already saw that the universe operates in regular ways. We can ask, are those ways good or bad? So Hume observes that, for one thing, the universe is very interrelated. So there are all sorts of different parts that work together and to produce all sorts of effects. And in many ways, they work well, right? So, for example, the Earth revolves around the sun provides heat, and that heat energy, which allows life to exist. Hey, that's good, right? And that creates, helps us to have an atmosphere and weather and so on. And that weather is in many times good, right? There's enough rain that plants can grow, for example. But Hume thinks the design actually isn't really that good. So the parts of the universe, they interact in delicate and fragile ways, and unfortunately, a lot of the times they produce negative outcomes. So sometimes there's way too much wind, like as in a tornado. So yes, the sun, provides energy, puts heat energy into the atmosphere. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. We get things like tornadoes. And then there's just sort of the mere fact of temperature, right? Sometimes it's too hot, sometimes it's too cold for us to get what we need. Sometimes there's enough rain, but sometimes, as we know, in California, there's not enough rain. In other places, there's too much rain, and all sorts of bad results ensue. Our organs function. Well, they function fairly well in their interaction, but often they get out of balance or out of whack. That there's too much of this hormone or not enough of that hormone or what have you, and bad things happen in our bodies. Emotions, well, our emotions, guide us around the world, and often they help us, but frequently they don't. Sometimes we get angry when it's inappropriate. Sometimes we don't get angry when it would be appropriate. Sometimes we're sad when it's not appropriate. Sometimes we aren't sad when it would be appropriate, and so on. So in all these ways, the regularities of the universe are sometimes helpful, but a lot of the times they're not. And so Hume thinks, is it necessary that we have all this poor design? It's hard to see why. I mean, maybe it is necessary that the Earth pumps so much heat energy into the atmosphere that we have tornadoes and it be too hot sometimes and too cold at other times. But maybe why does it have to be that way? Why does the sun have to produce all these variations? Maybe if the sun and the Earth were arranged differently, you wouldn't have these extreme fluctuations that produce all these, for example, extreme weather events that cause us problems. Or maybe our emotions could be better tuned to our situations, right? That all seems perfectly possible. So there's one then major cause of natural evil. It's the four circumstances together causing most of the suffering. And to review them, they are: first, all living creatures are capable of feeling pain and use pain as a damage signal and motivator. The world is governed by universal principles. Animals are endowed with a small stock of powers and faculties, namely only what they strictly need for survival, and the principles of the universe are inaccurate. They produce challenging situations. So these four different things cooperate together to cause a lot of suffering. First of all, the universe operates in regular ways. Secondly, these regular ways are not very well tuned for human and animal needs, so the regular ways produce lots of threatening situations. At the same time, we humans and animals don't have a lot of powers to handle those threats. So on the one hand, the universe is producing lots of threatening situations. On the other hand, we're not very well prepared to handle them a lot of the time. As a consequence, we're damaged frequently. And as a consequence of that damage, well, because of how pain functions, we feel a lot of pain. And so together, those four circumstances are what produce a lot of pain, and that's a lot of natural evil. And it seems like it's avoidable. So if living creatures were incapable of feeling pain and instead were motivated by changes in levels of pleasure, or if the world were governed by particular volitions, so if God chose to intervene in particular ways, or if we animals had a larger stock of power and faculties, or if the universe the principles were more regularly, the regular principles of how the universe works were laid out so that things didn't work out so badly so frequently, then there would be very little misfortune compared to what we feel at the present. And all you would need is to change one of those, and there would be a big improvement in our situation. So Hume thinks, look, to avoid much natural evil, all we have to do is change just one of the four features. We don't even have to change all of them. It's enough to change one of them. It's in cooperation. Together, they all produce this natural evil. So if we change one of them, they won't cooperate anymore, and a lot of the natural evil that they do cause wouldn't be caused. Looks like that natural evil is avoidable because surely we could change one of those four features a little bit, and that wouldn't wreck the universe, and we would at the same time avoid a lot of natural evil. And so Hume thinks there is a lot of avoidable natural evil, and the consequences of that I will discuss in the next video.